Okay, today I am going to be talking with somebody who I was just recently introduced to. Gregory Taylor pointed me to this guy, and I started digging, and the more I dug into it, the more interesting I found it. So I kind of rushed him into a quick interview, and so with that, I introduce you to Ricky Graham. Hey, Ricky, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Darwin. How are you?
I'm great. A quick introduction for you would be that you're an academic that teaches sound and music at,
Stevens Institute of
yeah,
Technology
there
in
you go.
Hoboken, New Jersey. Yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
additionally, you record and you perform under the name Signals Under Tests.
that's right.
And the thing that I found really intriguing was not only your use of guitar in ambient music, a music that largely is owned by keyboard players, but also your development of something crazy called the septar.
Yeah,
Can
sure.
you explain what the septar is?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a project off of the back of my PhD project at Ulster University, which I wrapped up at about around 2012. It was in collaboration with John Harding, who's a learning technologist and hardware extraordinaire there. And essentially what the septar does is it takes any kind of like MIDI guitar pickup system, and to be clear, there's absolutely no MIDI involved at this point. Essentially, all the septar does is it parses out the audio per string and allows a guitar player to essentially process each string independently.
Right. As part of your blog, I saw you posting a picture of someone else who seemed to also be recording the 6 pickups and then actually pushing it back through the connectors so that then recorded. I couldn't even completely understand, but I think what was happening was the recorded pickup activity was actually exciting the guitar synth device.
I'm not entirely sure which
Okay.
which blog post that is, but essentially, we've gone through 2 iterations of septar at this point, and the first one was very much a DIY, hacker maker kind of version, which we John produced the PCBs himself, and we provided very basic kits to beta testers.
Okay.
And so it's not a new. I'm kind of underselling the idea, but maybe, it's not a new idea by any means. I mean, this idea of like processing registers independently.
Right.
The idea has been around for a very long time. In fact, I remember talking to Adrian Freed about this back in, I think, 2009-ish. And he was explaining to me that, John Martin, a British guitarist,
Right.
had played around with these ideas like as early as the 70s, maybe late 60s, where he's breaking up, acoustic guitar pickups so that, he's processing top 3 registers differently than the bottom 3 different like analog effects pedals. So I mean, the concept itself is actually pretty ancient. And of course, then the MIDI guitar technology is pretty popular in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
But really, my interest started when I started speaking with Enda Bates. He's a composer out of Dublin. Was at Trinity College. And he started using it within a kind of electroacoustic composition context. So he was using it to take the audio from all registers, but then he was using it primarily for spatialization. So he was kind of adapting the guitar for multi-channel compositions, and I just thought, man, that's just something I want to do.
Right.
So and the circuit's not difficult. It's not a complex circuit. So John and I came up with our own version that. It's just basic buffering and a low-pass filter, and it gives you a better frequency response out of, in our case, it was the piezoelectric pickups like Graphtech make.
Right.
And and then that it just breaks out the audio. You jack it into your sound card, and I do all kinds of crazy stuff in PDMX. The individuation that allows you to track pitch more accurately in software. Envelope following is pretty simple too. And then there's a whole abundance of data that you can then map to all kinds of DSP, fun DSP. So,
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that guitar synthesis has actually gone from sort of like this commercial system where Roland would sell you a pickup that you would screw into your guitar face, and then you would buy their synthesizer. I mean, that commercial thing that was getting a heavy push for a long time. Now it seems to have fallen out of favor commercially, but is something that a lot of like hackers and DIY people have kind of taken on as a challenge. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it moved away from
yeah.
commerciality and into more of a hacker space?
I think probably just frustration more than anything. I mean, with those kinds of units, because the tracking's pretty decent on them. I mean, I started hacking the Axon AX50, if you're familiar with that, and at Stam in Amsterdam, actually, it was the first my first hacker project. Really, I was up until then, I was really just a guitarist that performed with Ableton Live, and then those folks encouraged me to hack a lot of stuff. But the answer to your question, I mean, I think that a lot of those commercial products, maybe the sample banks or the types of sounds that they produce are not really that interesting to a lot of guitarist folks. And I remember, the idea of breaking out audio to each register as well. Like, a lot of folks find that 6 or 7 times harder depending on how many strings you have on your guitar.
Right.
But beyond that, it doesn't really fit with the aesthetic of rock music or for example, the distortions, polyphonic distortions, multi-channel distortions sound a great deal different to your typical, magnetic, summed pickups as well. So there's that too. I don't know. I can only really answer from my perspective. I like the hacker approach because it's cheaper. I mean, a lot of these units cost like $500+, and our little kit costs, next to nothing really. I mean, you can get our version 2 off of OSH Park for you get 3 boards, 3 sets for like, I think it's $50-$60 or something.
Oh wow, that's cool.
It is cool, and then it's a learning process too. So I think that maybe part of the interest is that you're putting this together yourself, and that you're educating yourself, and you're building something that's yours to further your practice rather than relying on some commercial product that's out there. But that's not to say that some of the commercial products that are out there are pretty interesting and definitely hold merit.
Yeah, maybe. Although, I have to admit, so I have actually kind of a long history with guitar synthesizers.
Okay, go ahead. Cool.
Back when the Roland Gr 300 first came out, I was one of the first people in the country that had the opportunity to get one, and I was doing like studio work down in Dallas, and so it seemed like it had the opportunity to pay for itself. And it was my first opportunity to see how different it was. And so the GR 300 series had, first of all, it had a hex distortion, which, as you suggest, is a completely different sound. Chords don't break up. You actually can hear the individual notes of the chords. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it sounds completely not right, but it was kind of interesting. And then also it had this very simple synth engine that was really good for like screaming elephant tones and not much else, but at least it was unique and it was interesting. And then I continued playing around with it for a while, and then I moved on, and maybe a decade later a friend of mine picked up a Roland GR something. It was one of the little units, the foot units, and it was now the standardized Roland pickup. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear what kind of sounds that they are making. They probably tuned some stuff great for guitar. I put it on, and it was like they took a General MIDI module and just like squirted the acoustic piano and the electric piano, and it was surprising because it was as if the voicing of the instrumentation didn't seem to match the instrument that was in your hand.
Right. Yeah. It's a kind of a shallow interpretation of former acoustic instrument.
Right,
I don't
right.
know how you might phrase it, but I mean, I should preface what I'm about to say by saying I really value the synthesis of different instruments, and I not only incorporate that into my teaching, but it's something I actually have a great interest in. But my issue with all this, with the types of like the GR series products, is that they don't sound particularly great, and you've got a guitar at your disposal, and to me, I find like using that kind of raw audio source much more interesting than using it as triggers for samples.
Sure.
Or for synthesis. I mean, it's just that's where I'm at with that. And if I want my guitar to sound like a drum kit, I'll just go and learn a drum kit.
Right, or find a tool that at least interfaces with the drum kit in a drum-like way. I felt like the technique that you used to play guitar was not very well oriented towards playing a cello section. It just didn't seem to match up.
Yeah. So no, and that's a good point too. I mean, it's a mismatch of essentially instrumental practices, and while it's interesting, I think that my argument has always been that there's just so much more to that kind of technology. There's so much more that could be done with it, if we just think differently about it.
Right.
The commercial approach is very interesting, but at the same time, Gibson once joked with their multi-channel guitars that they launched, including the HD 6X or something like that, and the Tiger and Dusk. That's Tiger, I think, was the model that they released a while back. They joked that, you can jack in all your strings like 6 Marshall stacks, it'll sound awesome. They're joking. They're joking. They're being facetious, but at the same time, I mean, that kind of multi-channel application, particularly in experimental music and electronic music, is actually pretty fascinating. And this idea that you can immerse an audience in essentially the registers of your instrument is, something I'm still on board with after years of doing it. So
yeah, I was going to say, one of the things I noticed from your blog and from kind of the list of works that you do, that you are kind of into the massive multi-channel thing, as well as sort of dipping a toe into ambisonics as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit. So that's a kind of work I've never done. I've never interacted with high channel count surround. And tell me what it is that you like about it, and what I mean, is it an intellectual exercise, a way to finding way to make that interesting, or sonically does it do something specific for you?
I mean, arguably it's probably a little bit of both, but I would say the latter more so than the intellectual exercise. I think when I was a PhD student, there was a little bit of, how do I take an instrument, electric guitar practice further, and I delved into a lot of theory that was really very abstract, and as a result, kind of alienating almost. And I won't bore you with those details. The thesis is readily available if you need some bedtime reading to, good cure for the insomniac probably. But honestly, I mean, the multi-channel side of things is incredibly fascinating to me, especially in the U.S. at the minute, where you have venues like the Cube at Virginia Tech with 128 box loudspeakers, and the fact with this kind of system where you can jack out all your registers, you mentioned Ambisonics, which is the spatialization technique that I typically use. You can decode to all kinds of different array configurations, which is really wonderful. So I even use it when I play like regular kind of stereo or quad venues. So if I go and do a stereo gig in New York, you can decode the stereo immediately with a click of a button. It's a convenience thing more so than anything. But actually, the math behind Ambisonics is also really fascinating too, because it's just basic trigonometry, then coefficients for the decoders. And so where your speakers are positioned, you can decode to that layout, which is pretty cool. So for me, it's a developing aesthetic. You mentioned ambient music; it kind of goes hand in hand with that. I think it's immersive. It allows you to. I think it was a way for me to kind of break out of kind of the PD patches that I use, or the Max patches that I'm using for performance, and to try and make that a little bit more real. Kind of, I'm kind of performing in this data-rich environment, I guess. I'm taking all this data from the guitar and I'm trying to make it manifest in a performance space. It's kind of hard to do that in stereo, so the fact that you have multiple loudspeakers available to you, to me, it helps that process of trying to bring it out into the real world again, and out of this weird, abstract intellectual exercise that you mentioned before.
So now I'm curious, one of the things I like delving into in my podcast is people's backgrounds and how they got to be the artists that they are. I'm kind of curious about you because, again, in looking at a little bit of your bio, you're originally from Northern Ireland, right?
That's right, yeah.
And you find yourself in New Jersey. That alone sounds like a story. But additionally, being a guitarist, but doing this... I mean, I hate to call it just ambient music because it's really more of a... There needs to be a name for something where there's music with really complex timbre and where timbre generation and manipulation is important. Yeah. We kind of tend to lump that under ambient, but your stuff tends to belie that because sometimes there's a lot of movement. Sometimes there's a little bit of aggression, Yeah. And so it's a little bit more than your stock ambient music kind of thing.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I really love it. I'll say that as well. But I'm curious to know where you come from, what your background was, and how you got to where you are.
Oh, sure. Good question. I grew up in a little town near Belfast in Northern Ireland, and that's the only time in the interview that you'll hear my accent really come out. But. Yeah. Let me see. Well, I grew up with music. I couldn't escape it really because of my parents. My father's a traditional Irish musician. He plays mandocello, which is mandola. It's like a 8-string guitar-sized mandolin. Right. And he would play in a lot of session music, and he would do a lot of freelance studio recording, that kind of thing. So I was always surrounded by that kind of music. My mother was kind of Irish set dancing, and so I was very much immersed in the Irish traditional arts, which I think, played a big part on the kind of lyricism in my playing today. I'll always have that kind of a lilt to it, I suppose. Mm-hmm. The guitar, there was always guitars around in the house growing up. As a result, and all the kinds of instruments, pianos, violins. So I was always surrounded by music in some degree. And the guitar was always appealing because, my parents' musical interests always extended beyond Irish traditional music into rock music. And, so my dad was a big Cream fan, and, my mom loved Led Zeppelin, Thin Lizzy, AC/DC, all that kind of stuff. So I grew up with all that kind of stuff as well. So it was a no-brainer, really. I mean, that's just the instrument I was drawn to. And you mentioned before how my current music has, it kind of shifts between kind of maybe more gentle timbres and more aggressive timbres, and I think that's another reason why I kind of picked the guitar, was because you can get so much out of it. I mean, it's such an imperfect instrument as well, so it's a real challenge to kind of overcome the design of the instrument and become proficient at playing it. So I liked that challenge when I was younger as well. I loved to lock myself away and just woodshed for hours. I mean, that was it, I just really loved practicing the instrument too. And you can get so many, gentle sounds out of it, and you get so many aggressive sounds out of it, and that's kind of how I ended up with that instrument. But prior to that, I played, violin and piano and things like that. Mm-hmm. I studied music at grammar school. That was my thing. Definitely. That and sports. I mean, I played rugby, believe it or not. And then it was a choice between breaking my hands or, preserving them to play music.
It's funny. I'm actually here in LA. I'm staying with my friend Andrew, who grew up in New Zealand, where they're insane about rugby as well. And he was a clarinet player, and had a similar decision to make when he was in middle school. Basically, do I want my hands to work, or do I want to play rugby?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a serious decision too, because pretty much once you're hitting the age of around 18 years old, I mean, everyone's bigger. It's a more aggressive game, and
right.
Yeah. And I was getting to that stage, so I'm glad I made the decision that I made. Yeah, and of course the New Zealanders are prolific in the old rugby field.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's probably in the end. There's probably a longer career in getting your PhD than there would be in playing rugby as well.
I don't know. Rugby might be better paid. But,
Maybe so.
Sorry, did I say that? Yeah, I did. But anyway, what else? Yeah, aside from being surrounded by music at home, I studied it at school. I went on to university. I did my undergraduate at Queen's University in Belfast. It's also referred to as the Sonic Arts Research Centre, which they have there in Belfast. And I was kind of fortunate enough to be there before and after that opened, so I got to experience both worlds, pre and post SARC, as it were,
right.
At the undergraduate level. And then I went on to study, that was music technology specifically. So during that time I was kind of exposed to, electroacoustic music and Max MSP, Super Collider, things like that. And of course at the time I was like, I'm never ever going to have any use for any of this stuff. I just want to record in studios.
Right.
I just wanted to play guitar. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to play in bands and work in the studio. That was it. And of course, I couldn't have been more wrong, basically.
Right.
But so I owe a lot to Queen's University in that respect. And then I went to Ulster. I was very fortunate to gain a scholarship to do a master's and a PhD there. And during which time the master's itself focused on music performance, so that was everything from rock, metal, and jazz, pretty much. It was really a focus on the electric, which was really good. And then the PhD sought to, combine the undergraduate and master's degree, so it was kind of like, okay, you've got certain abilities on an instrument, how do you make that fit within electronic and experimental music? Because I was always drawn to the idea of, well, I love all these wonderful production techniques, can I do this in real time? And then the challenge of the age-old question, which, conferences like NAMM attempt the answer, how do you do that in real time convincingly? How do you do that, especially given that both your hands are busy? And started to build live performance systems, and I chose PD initially, having the prior experience with Macs, but not having the money to buy Macs. So but the woes of the PhD student, I suppose.
Right.
But yeah, so I got into it that way, and then I mentioned before I went to STIM in Amsterdam, and those guys really pushed me on it. They said, okay, well, if you're going to do this, you gotta program. My initial response was, well, can't you guys do that? And I'll just play. Right. You guys have built. They had Lisa and all kinds of really cool software. I was like, sure, I can just use that. And they're like, well, look, if you want a more intimate understanding, it's worth doing it. They gently, in a very European way, pushed me on it a little bit. And I went back as an artist in residence in 2010, and really brushed up on got my programming chops up. I haven't really looked back since. Now I will say that really had a kind of a detrimental impact initially on my playing, because I ended up programming more than I was playing. But in a way, what's interesting to me is that the software and hardware side is very much a part of the practice. Now, so when I go into the practice room, I have my laptop set up, and when I'm playing, I'm thinking about, well, okay, this is what the guitar sounds like as a guitar. What might I program to make it sound like I want it to? So it's very much a part of, it's integrated into the practice at this point, which is cool.
Sure. A couple of details about how you do your work.
Okay,
first of all, what is your primary guitar? What is the primary instrument that you play?
Yeah, good question. I am currently playing a 7-string guitar, and it's fitted with what I would refer to as a multi-channel pickup, but it's essentially a MIDI pickup designed by Graphtech, which is a Canadian company. Mm-hmm. It's piezoelectric. It has the regular kind of 13-pin DIN output, and I jacked that out into my aforementioned Septar system, which I worked on with Joan Harding.
So they make a pickup for a 7-string?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the deal there is that, traditionally the standard is 1 to 6 for a 6-string, and then the 7th pin on the DIN connectors for like a mono feed or a mono sum of the 6 individual pickups. Right. So I just
just tagged it.
I just use it for the 7th string. Basically.
Got it. Okay.
So it works out pretty well for me, and I just do filtering, any kind of filtering in software. But I am really excited now because I bought my first 8-string guitar last year, and a guy called Joel de Guzman, who runs a company called Sci-Fi Research, have produced a wonderful set of modular pickups called the News, NNU, and he's sending me some post NAMM this year.
Okay.
And so I'm going to install those, and I might change up the connector scenario a little bit. You can get those really nice LEMO connectors
All right.
have been suggested, so kind of 20 plus pin.
What's the name of the company that does these pickups?
Sci-Fi, that's CYCFI.
Oh, okay.
Research.
Got it.
Basically, it's a hub for all for the multi-channel guitarists or that are kind of working with these divided pickup ideas.
Right.
And that also includes Matthias Grob, who is behind the Gibson Echoplex. And, he's been working in that kind of vein for a long time too. So a lot of really interesting guys, and just being part of that community as well. It's seemingly growing and growing is pretty. It's educational.
That's cool.
It's really.
So you tap this out with the Septar. What are you feeding it into? You mentioned a lot of things so far. You mentioned working with PD and Max and Super Collider, but also Ableton Live. What is sort of like the end route on this stuff?
That's cool. That's a good question. I mean, I primarily pipe it into PD. So it really, the way I kind of organize the musical materials is in two worlds or two frames, if you will. So I still use like my regular kind of magnetic pickups. So I have a regular kind of mono feed from the guitar concurrently. So when I would perform, it would be I kind of contain all the guitaristic kind of materials to the stage. I'm still playing through an amplifier. Still using pedals. So I have this immediate, really tightly coupled relationship between what looks like a regular guitar and amplifier. So I'm still doing guitar type stuff that people recognize. And then the divided pickup stuff I pipe out into PD, and it goes out into a multi-channel array surrounding the audience. So there's kind of like two frames.
Got
if
it.
you can imagine it. There are some stuff, some posts and whatnot on my website that kind of go through this idea. So yeah, mainly PD, and I still use Ableton for the kind of the mono feeds as well. For like looping live if I don't want to drag pedals around with me. Ableton's embedded in my practice as well. It's where I started.
Sure.
I do some training for Ableton as well. I did the whole certification.
Okay.
A while back, and I teach it. I teach it at Stevens too. Students really like it when they come in as freshmen. I mean, it tends to be their DAW of choice, which is interesting. I think, especially for being in the New York metro area,
right?
Where most studios are still Pro Tools,
right?
But anyway, I mean, yeah. So, long story short, still mainly using PD. I mean, it's just such in my opinion, an easy to use programming environment. And in some cases, if I'm involved in certain projects, I might use Max as an alternative. The similarities are still pretty good. So it's an easy transition.
Right, indeed. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about some specifics with being a guitarist. You mentioned before something that drives me nuts when I try to do electronic guitar work, but also other performers whose hands are full. My friend Andrew, the clarinetist / saxophonist. My friend Jane, who's a flautist. All of us have the same problem, which two hands are occupied, and all of this software is really oriented towards mouse movements as a primary way of interacting with the software. Now, you can do some things with foot pedals like the soft step or whatever to mitigate some of that, but at some point the complexity of managing the pedals overwhelms the value of what you're trying to control. How do you handle that?
I mentioned before I take data from the guitar, so I'm tracking a whole bunch of stuff in my PD patches, including pitch and amplitude, and I'm organizing that pitch data into kind of like higher abstractions that deal with tonal ideas, so like pitch class sets and things like that, which also is, again, like an intellectual exercise. But my argument is that, a lot of this data can be used as control data. So as I'm playing, if you can imagine, a lot of this incoming data is stored in like a 2D array. Right. Those arrays can be used to, effectively as envelopes to control DSP. So, as I'm playing certain melodies, there's a continuous readout there that his maps say to the angle of how your system is panning your strings, right. Okay. For example. So that's a really kind of primitive mapping, but that's kind of where I started. And other projects I've looked at, say, tracking the body as well. So this is bringing in a new idea. So, the use of the connect to track the various points on the body and the instrument, and using, say, velocity acceleration data to control how sounds are panned around a space as well. Sure. So whether it's direction or how quickly they're panned around, that's kind of like some of the basic mappings that have come out of sort of earlier tests. So just trying to. It's a really good. It's a good problem, and it's hard to overcome that.
Yeah. Have you ever tried doing things like trying to determine what register or what position on the neck you're playing based on like what notes are coming out of which pickup or whatever? Have you ever tried doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, detecting what string you're playing is easy enough. I mean, when you've got that divided pickup situation ongoing, it's pretty simple. It's basic amplitude thresholding. Right. But playing, determining where you play in the neck. At one point I had to stop myself and think, well, why do I really care about this?
Okay.
Because at the moment you can become really immersed in a problem like that, and then lose sight of actually playing your instrument.
Right.
And at one point, I was really pleased that I was able to, track each register concurrently and be able to kind of, compute these abstract tonal structures in software. And I thought to myself, okay, so I have all these discrete values now that, it seemed kind of wonderful at the time, but then really what you've done is you've created a switch.
Right.
This discrete value that you're going to map to something. So,
okay, so you're just breaking down my whole worldview of what you must be detecting by just pointing out that in a lot of the cases that by the time you reduce the data to be useful, it becomes so reductive that it's not particularly interesting.
Well, it's still interesting. Maybe.
Okay.
It's still interesting. It can be useful. I think my issue with it was that it was this. It became this. After all that work, it became this discrete one-to-one mapping almost. So,
right.
I have one instance where I would use the pitch data to determine the behaviors of. I'm sure you're familiar with the Boyd's algorithm and Max and PD. Right. So I would use that to spatialize the strings around, and Enda. I mentioned Enda Bates, and I always have to give Enda props because Enda really, plugged me into this world. And he used Boyd's a lot with. He has a piece called Flock, which uses like cello, which is a really beautiful piece. And he uses Boyd's and Max to create these really beautiful spatial gestures. My idea was to take the pitch data from the guitar to determine how the Boyds flocked around. And so if I was resolving to the tonic or pitch class 0 or whatever in a set, then maybe the Boyds would flock to the center of the array. If I was playing outside of the set, maybe if I was playing something that was, say, in a chromatic space, then maybe they would flock to the periphery or to the edge of the array. So things like that. I mean, and that was my way of kind of making it more continuous again, rather than these kind of discrete switches.
Right.
Because I remember during my PhD, I talked to Craig Anderton about this, and he did say to me, Craig works at, or does a lot of stuff for Gibson, and other folks, I'm sure, had mentioned that the moment you turn your guitar string into the switch, you're doomed. And I think that he was kind of right in a way, because, you spend all that time trying to make it something that it's not, and you lose sight of what the guitar is, and it's very much in my opinion, a continuous instrumental art form.
Right. One of the things that I know from working with the Boyd's algorithm myself
Mhm.
is that when you start working with it, you quickly have to disabuse yourself of the idea of controlling them and instead start thinking in terms of influencing.
Yeah,
And
right.
that
Yeah.
actually really changes your headspace when you're working on some sort of instrumental movement or compositional task. It's a different headspace, and I think it's kind of a useful way to be thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess it's kind of that idea of, do you want to be a manager of a musical system, or do you actually want to be a performer as
Right,
well?
right.
No, you're totally right. I'd agree with that, and it does change your headspace too. I mean, the whole process kind of smacks of being a little bit of a control freak too. It's like I want to control every single iota of this system, but there's something nice about, and the Boyd's algorithm is a good example. There's something really wonderful about that. Allowing the computer to, have some say in, some of the structures that emerge. So.
Well, I think also that there's a certain kind of a trek that people go through depending on what instrument they started with. I remember when Jan Hammer was first coming onto the scene. So this is like ages and ages ago. But I read an interview with him, and he basically said, every keyboard player is trying to be a sloppy lead player like a guitarist. And every guitarist is trying to be a control freak, like a keyboard player.
Well, there might be some truth in that.
I think there might be. And so the
Yeah.
trek you go through, which is sort of like saying, I don't control very many parameters, so I would like to have more control. I think that that's kind of a natural part of the trek. And then you go through that only to find out what, at least for you, turns out to be the interesting things versus the not interesting things.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
curious now. You've really blazed out some interesting paths for yourself. Where do you see yourself going next? What are the areas that kind of intrigue you now?
The creative output, interestingly, like just focusing on actually performing and composing again. I've definitely gotten to a point where those technical skills, particularly the programming side, are kind of on autopilot. So,
Mm-hmm.
like I've started into a bit of like external development for PD. So I'm not only dealing in kind of abstractions, and that stuff tends to happen of its own accord now. But where I'm really focusing my energy is actually on getting back in the practice room, performing, playing shows, and I'm working on some new music now, which is a relief because it's been a while. I like you mentioned earlier, I've moved from Northern Ireland to New Jersey, which is was quite a transition, and that took a lot of time to kind of adjust culturally and whatnot. To a very different place where I didn't really have the same kind of network, and so it's taken a number of years to kind of really build up a network again,
Mm-hmm.
and to get out into a scene and actually start playing again. And conferences like Seamus and NAMM and have been great from a professional standpoint, and that really got me going again. So I'll be playing a show in February at Seamus down at Georgia Southern University in Statesboro. So that'll be fun. That'll be another show. I'm working with Peter Sala. He's a percussionist based in New Jersey. He does a lot of kind of marimba and kit work, and we've just started, so we're not sure where that's going. But yeah, the focus right now is definitely to write some new music, and the focus on that versus the design of the stuff that facilitates it.
That sounds great. Well, and it's good to hear too. I have this tendency to just sort of like get in the technical hole and never come out. And so it's good to see that you're introspective about making sure that you pull yourself out of programming world and push
Mm-hmm.
yourself back into performing world as well. For people who want to check out your work, where's the best place for them to hear it or
Sure.
read it?
Yeah, sure. RickyGraham.com is my. I basically just run a blog style website. So if you're interested in the academic stuff, it's on there, and the music's on there too, and software and the limited amount of hardware stuff is on the website as well.
Okay, and they can get to your SoundCloud from there too? Because I spent a lot of time diving into your SoundCloud. There's some beautiful work there. So.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. It's all up there. It's under. There's a category on the website labeled sounds, so you can find it under there.
All right, cool. And last but not least, something I always like asking people when I get them cornered like this is if you ran into the the younger 16, 18-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you give you to make the path either easier or harder, or just say, get into car sales or something like that?
Stick to rugby.
Yeah, right, stick to rugby. Your hands aren't that important.
No, in all seriousness, I probably would say, focus on practicing more so than the tech side. I think it's a small regret that I have so far, is that I maybe spent too much time immersed in technical details and not enough actually creating music. So that would be it, probably. And not to hold back. I have a horrible tendency to be very reserved and conservative when I play in some instances. So that's something that I've since addressed. But yeah, that would be my advice to my younger self.
Well, that's fantastic. Ricky, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and for kind of filling us in, not only your background, but some of your ideas about how this stuff works and
sure.
How you can open your head to it. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much, Darwin. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, with that, I'll say goodbye. Bye now.
All right. Bye.
Okay, I want to thank Ricky for spending a little time with us talking about guitars. Makes me want to get the guitar out of the closet. Of course, that always happens when I talk to interesting people. So, anyway, thanks to Ricky for that. Thanks a lot to you for listening. Thanks to my friends out at Synthtopia and other online venues that are helping spread the word about the podcast. And I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks a lot, and we'll catch you later.